Good evening, everybody. Welcome. If I can get your attention, please. All right. It feels like Bible class trying to get all my teenagers' attention, and some of them are on their phones. Nope. Oh, yep. All right. Here we go. So thank you very much for coming once again to another Bar Talks. I'm really excited about tonight. Really thankful again for 1933 and just their hospitality. So round of applause here. Thank you very much. Absolutely amazing food and drinks. So first and foremost, tell all your friends about this place. I've joked around before. Sometimes I end up inviting more people to 1933 than church sometimes. And it's dangerous. There's something about that. Good food. Jesus loves food. So I want to introduce our speaker. You have on your table here, if you want to take this just for your own notation for later, so you can remember who was speaking tonight, and you can also remember to maybe purchase and get a book. His recent book, Strange Religion, I haven't read this one yet. It just was just today, so that's why. This one I've read. It is phenomenal. Tell Her Story. Anybody else have read this book in the audience besides him? He read the Audible, so obviously he read his own book. That must have been fun. But how women led, taught, and ministered in the early church. Tell Her Story. Absolutely amazing. And this says he's just done so much work. I don't know how. Do you sleep? Like every time I hear what this guy is doing, I'm like, I think he has a cheat code for life. He's game genied his calendar somehow, some way. He just has almost all the time in the world. But I love listening to him. I was first introduced to him on a podcast called Slow Theology. A friend just texted me a while back and said, "Hey, check this out." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I really like listening to Nijay and AJ." And I knew of AJ because I had read, what's his book, The Sabbath? Subversive Sabbath. And what a phenomenal read. Hey, Pastor Dave. What a phenomenal read. Yeah. Pastor's in the house. And so I highly recommend all the stuff he's put out. So he's going to be talking tonight on the book Strange Religion. I'm not going to say too much about it other than would our ancient brothers and sisters in Christ, would they really know who we are today? Like, would they be surprised at some of our practices and behaviors and the like? And what things do we have in common with them as well? So I've heard a couple of podcasts where he's been talking about this book. Really interesting stuff. I'm really looking forward to reading that book. So you guys, please welcome Nijay Gupta.
Thank you, John. I didn't know what to expect coming here tonight. I didn't know they kind of rented out the whole place. My wife asked me, is this like Science Pub, but with like theology nerds? And I was thinking it was just John and like a big table with like 6 of his family and friends. But this is way cooler. That would have been fine, John. But this is way more fun, and my wife would be so excited to know that I got my own Science Pub talk, the science of Jesus. I live in, just a little bit about me, you might be curious. I live in Southwest Portland. I've been here for 9 years. My wife is Amy, and she is a marriage therapist, so I get a lot of free therapy. And she's also has done ministry with Young Life and youth ministry and children's ministry and some other things. 3 kids. John and I were talking. We have similar life stage stories. My oldest, Simran, is a girl. She's 17. Aiden is 15, and Libby is 12. So I just dropped Aiden off at soccer, came here. So full life, busy life. But I'm excited to talk about this book. Just so you know a little bit about what I do, I teach at Northern Seminary. I used to teach at George Fox University. That's why I moved out here. I moved from Rochester, New York in 2014 to teach at George Fox. I taught at the Graduate Center in Tigard for 5 or 6 years. And then I got recruited to a school in Chicago, but we love Oregon so much that we wanted to stay. I love those shirts that have like an outline of the United States. And then they have like Oregon in the middle, and it says "Keep Oregon Secret." Have you seen those? I like that. We should keep it secret. But we love being here. My wife is heavily involved in the community in Southwest Portland that we're in, and we really enjoy the atmosphere here, the good beer, the good coffee, and the good people. I teach New Testament, so I teach Greek. I'm teaching Greek right now. I teach courses on how to interpret the Bible faithfully, and I teach a lot of courses on New Testament topics. I want to talk about this book today. So today is the launch day, super fun, and excited to actually be talking to folks today about it. This book came out of some of my experiences actually here in the Portland metro area. I consult with a lot of pastors. I've taught maybe 1,000 pastors in the last 10 years, 15 years. And during this book really came out of the pandemic. During the pandemic, 2019, 2020, we started to see, and I'll talk about Portland just because that's where I live, we started to see the shift to Zoom church, the shift to online church. And as I was consulting with pastors, we saw just a big drop-off in church attendance because who wants to sit in front of a screen and watch church and trying to do I sing along? Do I not? Is it irreverent? It was all that weird stuff. Can I watch it later? Does it matter if it's live? And then when people started going back to church, I noticed that a lot of my pastoral colleagues were recognizing people didn't really know if they needed church. Because, I got used to skiing, I got used to sleeping in on Sunday, I can just watch it later. And the sentiment that I kept experiencing and hearing was, there's nothing really special about church. Now, I know that's not how some of you feel, but we're seeing that all across the United States. That church just kind of blends into the background. Now, add to that some of the events that have been going on in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years in the United States with race issues, with political issues. And much like what you experience in Portland, I experience, it's a very heavily unchurched area. A lot of my neighbors, I come from Ohio where everybody goes to church. So trying to get to church is a little bit challenging. Not here. The highways are clear. I could be on my phone while I'm driving on a Sunday. I won't do that. But what we notice with some of the things going on in society is that what I'm hearing from my neighbors is that they don't like Christianity because from what they hear on the news about Christians, I'm not going to name names, what they hear on the news is that Christians reflect and amplify the worst of American culture: sexism, narcissism, extreme individualism, racism, classism, all of those things, right? And if you think about what people hear in the news, why wouldn't they think that? And where the dissonance came from me is when I read the Bible, specifically when I read about Jesus and the apostles. I'm not reading about people that conform to and reflect the worst of culture. I'm reading about people who turn the world upside down. That actually comes from the book of Acts, where these apostles are out there on all these adventures, and they're preaching about Jesus, and they're talking about a brand new world order, and the Romans didn't like that. They said, you need to get rid of these people because they're turning the world upside down. I was partly inspired by John Lewis's language of good trouble. Whether you like John Lewis or not, I'm a fan of John Lewis. He went to seminary. Do you guys know that? He went to seminary, and then he ended up becoming a politician. But a lot of his civil rights activity are inspired, much like Martin Luther King Jr., by the Bible, and this idea that we shouldn't just follow culture like lemmings. If we're reading the New Testament, we're really inspired by what we read. We have to be willing to stand sometimes against the grain of culture and society in a winsome way, in a compelling way, in a good way, but that's what I saw in the earliest Christians. So this book really is my attempt to immerse readers in the first century, to take you out of this world of pubs and beer and place you in the Roman world that is a different time and place. There's an author named L.P. Hartley has this wonderful quote. He says, "The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there." And so I wanted to take readers and plop them into the middle of the first century and say, how did these Christians do it? You know, we're willing to oppose society in like one area. Like, you know, I'm going to wear pajamas to Trader Joe's or something. Like, we're willing to do that. But these Christians, they did things completely backwards in society. And I'll explain a little bit some of the things that they did. And hopefully it'll provide some conversation and even some inspiration. But I was also really inspired for this book by the city of Portland. And in fact, there's pictures in the book, for those of you that like picture books. And the very first picture is Keep Portland Weird. Now, why do we like to keep Portland weird? Who knows, right? Watch Portlandia. But part of the charm of Portland is, and I know this because my kids have grown up here, people have the freedom to be themselves. Maybe not all the time. Middle school is still middle school. You know, trying to fit into a work culture is trying to, but generally speaking, this idea that you don't have to conform to the norm, you can be yourself. You could be who you're meant to be. Define that as you will. I think the Christians did think like that. They thought, I don't have to blend into culture to be doing the right thing. I can deviate from the norm because of who I am. And I think in the right set of circumstances, that can be really empowering, right? Anyone with children knows how important it is to send them the message that you don't have to follow the crowd. You have to know what's true, what's good, what's right, and just do it. Just do that thing. And certain cultures can be really oppressive in how they try to force you to conform. Portland has its own problems. But I was really inspired by that understanding of Portland. And I thought, is Christianity sufficiently weird in the best ways today, like it was in the first century? All right, let's pivot a little bit. I want to just paint a really quick picture of what life was like in the Roman world, specifically Roman religion. And then I'm going to get in a little bit about how the Christians were different. Religion was very different in the Roman world than it is today. Today, religion is often a choice. You kind of choose from a menu of options. It's kind of part-time for many people. It's almost like yoga. You know, if I get a chance to do some yoga, I'm going to do some yoga. Otherwise, I don't have time for yoga. A lot of people treat religion that way. It's sort of like a hobby. Like, I'm going to play pickleball. Or I'm going to go for a hike. I haven't gone for a hike in like 6 years. Okay, I'm a hiker, and I haven't gone for a hike in 6 years. And I think people treat religion that way. Well, in the Roman world, religion was an obligation. It was not private, it was public. And it was something that permeated culture. So you think of the Roman world, the Roman Empire, you might have heard that it's polytheistic, meaning they have multiple gods. And it's true. But that doesn't really tell you how they did religion. They actually subscribed to Roman state religion, which is the religion of like Zeus and, you know, Athena and all of that, but they would use the Latin terms Jupiter, Juno, so forth. So someone actually said to me today, are our planets named after these gods? They actually are, by the way, named after the gods, because those are these celestials in the sky. So Romans were obligated to worship the Roman gods. Think of them like cosmic overlords. They were like governors, but they lived on Mount Olympus. And your whole goal in Roman religion was a Latin phrase that I talk about in the book, pax deorum, meaning peaceful coexistence with the gods. This was priority number one in the Roman world. You had to maintain peaceful coexistence with the gods for two main reasons. One is you don't want the gods against you, because then they're going to terrorize you. You're going to lose your land. You're going to lose your livelihood. You're going to lose your life. And two, you want to keep winning in life. And you're going to win in life as the Roman Empire if you keep the gods happy. We're going to conquer other nations. We're going to expand. We're going to take over. So sometimes we think of religion, especially if you're Christian, as like kind of warm fuzzies. Like, I'm going to go to a coffee shop. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to talk to Jesus. It's going to be real warm and fuzzy. Roman religion was not warm and fuzzy. They don't talk about the heart. They don't talk about the soul. It's basically keep the masters happy. Think about being a slave in the Roman world. You don't have warm fuzzies for your master. You just want to keep the master from hurting you, and you want to get in the good graces of the master so that you might get a day off, or you might get a little extra food, something like that. That's how they treated their gods. A few of the fundamentals of Roman religion was society operated according to a big pyramid of power. So at the top, you have the fewest people, and at the bottom, you have the most people. And so at the top, you would actually have the gods, the Olympians. Anyone watch Percy Jackson? All right. So you have the Olympians, and then you have the demigods, and you have like elevated heroes that get like Hercules. And then below that, you have the emperor, and he kind of stands on the bridge between heaven and earth, the Roman emperor. In fact, he was actually, one of his titles was the Pontifex Maximus. So we get the word pontiff, the pope, from this, which means the great bridge builder between heaven and earth. And so the emperor was actually treated like a god. He wasn't a god, but he was accepted as an honorary god, basically. And then below that, you have the class system. So you have the senatorial class, which are the highest level. You have the equestrian class. And then you have commoners, wealthy commoners. And then you have, they didn't really have a middle class. It went pretty quick from high class to low class. You didn't really have white collar. And then you had the urban poor, which are a very large group of people. And then you had slaves. And what's interesting about slaves is that historians today say that slaves made up between 25 and 35% of the Roman Empire. Think about that. That's a lot of slaves. 1 in every 3 or 4 was a slave. And it would be higher number in urban environments, a little bit lower number in rural environments. And then at the very bottom, you have the disabled, you have criminals, you have immigrants and foreigners, things like that. And you had, those people were at the very bottom. And privilege moved upwards, as it does today. But Rome liked to reinforce echelons of privilege and power. So, for example, in Roman religion, you had to be somewhere to be close to a god. You had to go to a temple. Now, there were temples in every city, but the real action happened in Rome. So the closer you were to Rome, the closer you were to the gods. It's almost like Rome was a second home for the gods. They lived on Olympus, but if they were going to visit Earth for like a gala, they're going to actually go to Rome because that's where all the action's at. So there were these privileges that if you were poor and you couldn't make it to Rome, you don't get to be where the action is. Think about that with like the Super Bowl or the Olympics. You want to pay all this money to be where the action is if you can. Priests. Now, sometimes we think of Jewish priests, if you've heard the language of priesthood and you're wondering from the ancient world, Jewish priests were often commoners. They were just regular folk like you and I, and they would have regular jobs, but they were priests, and when it was their turn to work at the temple, they would get called up for their couple weeks of service. They go to the temple, serve, and leave. So most priests were commoners. There were more fancy priests, the chief priests that were a little more wealthy, but they were rare. Roman state religion only had elite priests. These were often senators, high-class people, and they would buy their way into a priesthood to give them more prestige. They might get better seats at the gladiatorial games. They might get better privileges at the Circus Maximus, the great race circuit of Rome. And you didn't have a chance if you were lowly and poor of getting a Roman priesthood. You just didn't even have a chance. Now let's talk about the Christians. Look at my time here. John will give me the stink eye if I take too long. So let's talk about the Christians. Now, if I were to, so John's teacher, so if I were to go to John and I said, hey, John, I have a great idea for a new school. He said, okay, tell me about it. I say, okay, we don't have, okay, it's going to be great, but we don't have students, teachers, textbooks, desks, or a building. He'd say, okay, but what actually, he's like, I'll take that job. But what actually is it? Well, think about this. The staples of Roman religion and all ancient religion was temples, priests, sacrifices, and statues. Anyone that wanted to start a religion had to have those four things. So think about Jews at the time. They had their Jerusalem temple. Their Jerusalem temple was beautiful. Remember when the disciples are coming out of the temple and they say to Jesus, Jesus, look how amazing these great temple building stones are. You know what Jesus says? He's kind of a downer. He says, you wait, there won't be one stone on top of another when the great destruction happens. They're like, geez, Jesus, come on, man. Drink some coffee or something. But they would gawk at the temple. It was so beautiful. People would travel from around the world that even weren't Jewish to see the Jerusalem temple. Priests. Jews had priests. They had chief priests. They had a whole political network of the Sanhedrin connected to the temple. They had a high priest. Sacrifices. If you went to the temple, one of the questions that I ask in the book is, what does worship smell like? Now today we would say probably coffee and carpet cleaner. And maybe like the perfume of the person next to you. I'm doing okay. But in the ancient world, everyone would say the same two things. They would say worship smells like smoke and blood. Because you're constantly making sacrifices. Now in Judaism, it's a little bit different. They had atonement. But in Roman religion, they were constantly making sacrifices. And it was all for appeasing the gods and for gaining favors from the gods. You're basically bribing the gods with lots of sacrifices. When a certain Roman emperor came to power, they sacrificed 120,000 bulls. Think how much blood that is. What do you do with all that blood? Christians didn't have any of those things, let's say by 75 AD. Nobody was called a priest in early Christianity until the 5th century. They didn't have temples. If you've ever read the Apostle Paul's letters, you probably didn't notice this because you didn't know you should notice it. He never tells Christians to go on pilgrimage. That doesn't strike us as odd, but that's something you would absolutely do in any religion in the ancient world. You would save all your nickels and dimes, and you would want to go on pilgrimage to the island of Samos, or to Jerusalem, or to Rome, because you wanted to be closer to where the action is. And one of the things that an early Christianity historian named John Barclay says is the Christians weren't mappable. They had what he calls spatial elusiveness, meaning there's nowhere in the Roman Empire where you're closer to God than another place. Now, we take that for granted because of the tradition of Judeo-Christianity in America. But really before Christianity, that wasn't an idea. So think, how many remember, and I'm guessing some of you in here, dial-up internet? How many remember logging on to the internet? Logging on, like with the bing, bing, bong. Remember that? All the bings and bongs. So for those of you young people, those of you like Gen Z or whatever you're called, we had to use our phone line, our boring, slow phone line to get on the internet, but you didn't want to clog up your phone line. So you logged on. That's kind of like how Roman religion was. You had to be in a certain place in front of your massive computer. You had to log on. You had to connect to your God in a specific place. I remember the first time my dad got a car phone. It was like the coolest thing ever. And we're trying to explain it to people like, you're just in the car and you can call somebody. Like, it's the craziest thing. And then now we have Wi-Fi, right? We have fiber optics, we have Wi-Fi, and we don't even think about it. But if you're from a generation where you remember either not having the internet, which does sound crazy, right? or dialing up. Think about the technology evolution that we've lived through. That's what the Christians were doing. They actually engaged in a religious technology innovation. I actually talk about this in the book. I was watching Stranger Things. Any fans of Stranger Things? Okay, a few of you. All of the stuff I watch on TV is research for my books. So I was watching Stranger Things, and this takes place in the 80s, which is my generation. And there's a scene where there's a monster. I'm sorry I'm spoiling it for you. There's monsters in it, okay? There's a monster chasing some people in a building. And I remember yelling out. It was dark. I shouldn't have watched it in the dark on a Saturday night by myself. But I remember yelling out, "Call the police." I do get lonely. I call the police. And then it struck me, they have to be near a phone to call the police. Like I'm so used to being able to connect anywhere at any time. My daughter's in volleyball. We play at, she practices at this facility in Beaverton. And you go into this building in the deep recesses of this gym, and there's no Wi-Fi. And I feel like I'm going to suffocate and die because I can't connect to the internet while I'm in there. So people are literally out in their cars getting work done because there's no Wi-Fi. But this is what the Christians did. They said, listen, you can worship God no matter how much money you have. You can worship God anywhere. And not only that, he already has a gracious attitude towards you. He's ready to say yes to what you need. Think about the book of Hebrews, where the writer of Hebrews says, let us approach the throne of, does anyone know how that ends? Grace. But in the Roman world, you wouldn't hear that word grace. It would be, let us approach the throne of fear, judgment, power, authority. Now, all that's true of God, but Hebrews says, let us approach the throne of grace. How should we approach the throne of grace? Should we approach it with meekness and fear? I don't know what's going to happen. It might get struck dead. No, let us approach the throne of grace with confidence or boldness. Why? Not because I'm worthy, but because God's already in a good mood. This is the gospel. Ready? God is already in a good mood when he thinks about you because of Jesus Christ. Amen. That's what Hebrews says. Let us approach those with great confidence, knowing we'll receive mercy and grace. How often do my kids come to me ready to ask for a favor, already knowing I'm going to give it to them? Almost never. Almost never. There's like, can I have an extra? I'm like, no. You cannot have an extra whatever you want. And they'll say, bottle of water, see? I was like, okay, you got me. In the Roman world, there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear of the gods. Because when you read the stories about the gods, they are manipulative, the Roman gods. They are petty. If you watch Percy Jackson, you would know this. They're petty, they are mercurial, they're temperamental, and you don't even want to look directly at them. That's also in Percy Jackson. You don't want to look directly at them because they're too glorious. You don't want to offend them. And yet, when we read the Bible, we read the New Testament, the teaching of Jesus, the teaching of the apostles, what we learn for the Christians is the main thing to know about God is that he loves. There's a theologian named Charles Cranfield, and he was asked once to summarize the whole gospel in 4 words. And he said, Romans 8, God is for us. The whole gospel can be summarized in 4 words. If God is for us, who could be against us? God is for us. That wasn't true of Roman gods. They might make a deal with you. They might want something from you. They might favor you because they have something, or you have something. Or you might be genuinely good and they're generally disposed to you, but it wouldn't be true for everybody. They would say, I'm rooting for you, but not for you. Or I'm rooting for you, but not for you. But the crazy thing about the teachings of the apostles is they said, no matter who you are, Jew or Greek, Roman, Scythian, barbarian, female, male, high class, low class, poor, rich, slave, free, God is for you. There's no privilege because everybody gets the same thing. There was a 4th century theologian named St. John Chrysostom. He's reflecting on the problem of economic difference within the church, the rich people and poor people. And he wanted to explain why there shouldn't be rich people and poor people, that everyone should have the same. And he actually took his reasoning from the creation story. He said, when God created the sun, he created the sun to shine on everyone. When God created rivers, he created the rivers to be used by everyone. And how dare we limit access to water? How dare we limit access to the sun? He said, in the same way, we shouldn't have economic difference. There shouldn't be rich people at the expense of poor people. There shouldn't be poor people wishing they were rich people. And the Christians had this crazy idea, we should share with one another. We should be taking care of one another. That was the opposite of the Roman world. The Roman world said, if you were born in a certain place in society, that's where you belong. And oh well to the people at the bottom. I'm going to tell one or two more stories, and then we'll have time for discussion. There was a Roman statesman named Pliny who was not a Christian, and something he writes in a letter is very important, very telling for the Roman world. He writes to one of his colleagues named Tiro, who's a Roman officer. And he's a kind of up-and-coming Roman officer, kind of a star in the making. And Pliny says to Tiro, I see that you are cozying up to your subordinates, your inferiors, and you're trying to be buddy-buddy with them. He says, I know what you're doing, but it's dangerous because you're going to confuse them about what level you're at and what level they're at. And he has this famous statement, which it's in my book. He says, the most unequal thing is the appearance of equality where it doesn't exist. What he's basically saying is equality is okay within a class section, but once we start messing between the classes, society will turn to chaos. Pliny is reinforcing a class system, saying this is just how it is. There are kings and there are subjects. There are slaves and there are masters. There are highborn and lowborn. Thus it has been, thus it will always be. And if we pretend it's not that way, it'll lead to anarchy and chaos. But then the Christians come, and one of the lines that's repeated by multiple apostles, and that usually is a signal of something really important, is God is not a respecter of persons. That's Old English. Today we would say, God doesn't play favorites. That's probably the most un-Roman thing in the entire Bible. God doesn't play favorites. That would be one of the most dangerous things. That is exactly what Pliny would not want you to say. Because he's saying, if equality isn't real, then we're only confusing people by pretending it's real. It was actually the Christians who spread this notion that every individual has inherent worth and significance. Every single, and this conversation keeps coming back up in society with disabled people or immigrants, with questions around abortion, with questions around policy, right? And we keep coming back to the idea of the inherent dignity and worth of the individual. That comes right out of the page of the New Testament. That idea did not exist in a socio-political philosophy before then. Democracy was out there in the air somewhere with the Greeks. The idea of giving people a chance was out there. Romans like to give people a chance. But the idea of the inherent dignity of the individual was not. That's where we get to texts like Galatians 3:28, where Paul says, in Christ, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, slave or free, male and female. What he's not saying is that you shouldn't care whether you're male or female or whether you're Asian American or some other kind of American. I'm proudly who I am. What he is saying is that we shouldn't determine someone's worth on the basis of that. That is a distinctively Christian idea that we've latched onto in the West and sometimes have lost. So, give him one more analogy and then we'll turn it over to questions. I wrote the book and I turned it into my editor, and he said, you need something in the introduction that's going to have a little bit of a punch to it to help people understand what you're really getting at. and what you really want people to get out of the book. So I added a section to the book, and it's about coconut water. So one day, I went to the Costco in Tigard. Hate that Costco, by the way. Terrible parking lot. Always busy. And I had a hankering for coconut water. Now, before that, I'd only ever had coconut water in the Midwest, which is going to tell you something, because I'm from the Midwest. But I thought coconut water was clear like this. And the coconut water they were selling at Costco was pink. I think this is gimmicky, or maybe it's gone bad or gone funky. I don't know what's going on. So I looked at another one, also pink. And in fact, all the coconut water packages were pink. I said, what's going on here? So there's actually a label on the packaging that says, why is this coconut water pink? And so I read the packaging, and it's all in my book. If you don't care about the subject, at least buy it for the information about coconut water. So the reason is real, natural coconut water, when you open a coconut up, as soon as that coconut water interacts with oxygen, over about 48 hours, it'll turn pink. The oxygenation will cause the water to turn pink. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not funky. It's just a chemical reaction. So why have I always seen clear coconut water? Because a lot of mass market producers think that people want clear coconut water because they expect clear coconut water. So they actually chemically alter the coconut water to make it clear so that you feel like it's natural. So I thought, have we done that with Christianity in the West? Have we chemically altered it to make it more palatable to what we think is normal? And I really end that first chapter by saying, with coconut water, I learned that if it's really pink, I want the pink stuff. And with my Christianity, I've learned, if it's a weird color, give me the weird color version. I want it natural. I want it the way it was meant to be taken. Thank you. Have I earned my dinner yet?
Absolutely. Well, Nijay, thank you so much for that. Now I'm officially a coconut water expert, ready to take it out to the streets.
Fringe benefits.
Now it's time for the fun part, and so we're going to open up the floor.
Wait, that wasn't the fun part?
That was great. Thank you. And so we're going to open up the floor for questions. And so any and all questions are welcome. Sorry, Nijay. Good luck. And so, yeah, raise your hand if you got a question. I'll give you the microphone.
This probably isn't the question you're expecting, but I see you have 2 books. Are they on Audible?
They are. Okay, so Tell Her Story is officially on Audible. Strange Religion, I did record the audio, but it won't come out until the middle of March. So you have to wait on that one, but it's coming. Okay. And normally academics aren't allowed to narrate their own books because they think we're terrible at it, and most of us are, but they let me do it. I think they listen to my podcast, so they let me do it. So I did narrate both of these, which is fun.
Being a librarian, are there study guides or anything that go along with these? So as you read, you can key into the cue points?
It's a good question. 2 of my students created a study guide for Tell Her Story, and it's free on the publisher's website. So this is InterVarsity Press, ivpress.com. Strange Religion, no, but the book just came out, and it's something we're looking into, so we're hoping to create something that people can use, maybe in the... Yeah, probably and definitely.
Yes, what are some of the strange things that religion does now that sets it apart, like the strange things that happened in the Greek and Roman world?
You said now, though.
What are we doing now?
Oh, I see. What are we doing now? In a good way or a bad way? Either way. Okay, in a good way. I think one thing I'm just thinking some of these things off the cuff. So I lived in Boston for 5 years in the early 2000s. And I was part of the Alpha program. Anyone know what the Alpha program is? The Alpha it's a way to introduce unchurched people to Christianity in a very non-threatening, conversational, over dinner. They even have recipes, like you're supposed to make these really great meals. And one of the things that came out of that was, there would be 3 or 4 Christians, and then a whole bunch of your friends are coming to learn and eat and talk. And we would sing a hymn, one hymn. And I can't tell you how many people love that, because think of someone that maybe sang in school, but then if you're not in a religious setting and you're not in choir as a hobby, as an adult, where are you singing with other people? I mean, maybe Christmas carols, something like that, but you're just not. I mean, maybe at the Timbers game where you're, singing all their cheers. But generally speaking, you're not. And so the beauty of singing together with other people in unison is, I think it's a gift. I think it's a gift that many of us take for granted. That, I'm going to seem really nostalgic here, so just indulge me. So probably in the late 90s, there was a national day of prayer where they called all men, this was the 90s, to come to Washington, D.C. and gather on the mall. Does anyone remember this? Oh, you remember it? Okay. So we traveled there were motorcycle gangs. There was all kinds of people. There were like caravans of semis. And we would gather in these, to travel, we would gather in these subway cars in D.C. to get there. And so it would be a subway car just completely full of Christians, front to back. Poor like 1 or 2 other people that didn't know what was going on. Front to back, train after train, and someone would start a hymn and we'd start singing. And I just got chills. I get chills just thinking about it. Of the idea of just the power of music, the power of unison, the power of, I didn't know these people. And some of them don't look like me, and some of them don't dress like me, but the idea that we all care about Jesus unified us across the nation. It's hard for me to imagine anything like that happening now, with the division, with the political division, with the animosity and hatred that's out there. Would I be safe, in that environment? But one thing that comes to mind is that in Portland, one thing that comes to mind is I rented an Airbnb in Eastside Portland to film a video course. They wanted a nice looking place. And it happened to be across the street from Bridgetown Church, which is one of the more influential churches in Portland. And we were taking a break, the filming crew and I. We were walking around the neighborhood. And the church was actually practicing for worship on a Wednesday night. It was really loud. And there was a guy outside mowing his lawn. And he looked a little bit annoyed by the noise. And we were just loitering. So we asked him, hey, we're just curious. And we're just, what do you think of this church? I don't go to that church, by the way, but I do like Bridgetown. I was like, what do you think of this church? And he started out by saying that he doesn't like evangelicals because of Trump. I mean, the image in mind is, I don't like evangelicals because of Trump. And went on and on. He said, but I know this church does a lot for the community. They are a warming shelter. They are a disaster shelter. They do a food bank. They host events for the houseless in the area. They do lots and lots of benevolence work. And I thought, he likes that they're there for that. They're weird. I think he'd say they're weird. And they're almost like a cult. And it would be kind of the way he would say it. But they do good for society. They care about people. I might be getting some of this wrong. You guys may know this better than me. But I know that when the city of Portland was struggling with the foster care system, and they created Embrace Oregon, which tries to care for people in the foster system, they started partnering with churches to help with Embrace Oregon, to help with some other organizations, Safe Families. And my wife volunteered for an organization where, with Embrace, where It's called Foster Kids Night Out. Have you guys heard of that? Where if you are a foster parent and you want to have a date night, they have these volunteers, including my wife, that are trained to work with foster kids. You bring them to a church. You drop your kids off, and they have games, they have events. You can go out for a date, and they bring in like Diego Valeri, they bring in Damian Lillard, they bring in Tobin Heath, these great, sports heroes here who have left, but they were here. And these are Christian churches, so that it's like we're trying to rebuild our reputation, saying you may think we hate people, we need to prove to you we care about people. And so when, I don't know if you guys know this, Portland is poor. We are so poor. We don't have any money because we just have had so much devastation. And so we need churches to step in and help. And they are. And when no one else has the money, resources, or capability to help, churches can say, we're not rich either, but we're going to give as much as we can to make sure we're helping. And because of the cornerstone emphasis in churches on compassion, if I were to wave a magic wand and change the entire American church and say, if there was one thing I want the church to be known for, the word would be compassion. Now, you don't have to agree with somebody to show them compassion. You don't have to be on the same page politically. You don't have to be on the same page policy. You don't have to have voted for the same person. You don't have to have shopped at the same place. You just have to say, they're human, I'm human, Jesus is human, and God, we need to take care of these people. So I think as far as churches are doing those things, they're being weird because they're saying, we're not going to just do a little bit better in society, we're going to do everything Jesus asked us to do.
Thank you.
Hi. You know me somewhat as my former professor, and I came to seminary looking, I think, for some hope and reconciliation to a religion that I grew up with, but that I felt edged out of once I became a divorcee and a survivor of domestic violence and someone with a disability. There was no longer like a place for me at church. I couldn't volunteer, and I was kind of like forgotten. And I am wondering, like I'm working towards trying to see how, from the New Testament, we see a very different example of the church. And I wonder what kind of unique hope that someone like me, because there are so many like me, someone like my children might find from the New Testament.
Great question. Thanks for the vulnerability to be able to ask that. And I do remember that part of your story. One of the things about Romanness that I didn't mention but is true is monoculturalism. Rome wanted everyone to be the same. And if you weren't able to be the same, then you were just an outsider. So even the word barbarian, it is actually an onomatopoeia, meaning it was actually Romans making fun of other languages and saying, when you speak, all I hear is bar, 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 bar. So basically, to call someone a barbarian in the Roman world is to call them a cultural outsider and say, I don't care to learn your language. I don't care to learn about why you're different. I don't care to learn about your culture. You be like me or you're not important to me. That was how Rome was. They wanted uniformity. And one of the things I see in the New Testament is the attempt to allow cultural diversity with a unity of spirit. So take, for example, the Roman churches. Rome would have had, think about this, middle of first century, Rome would have had one of the biggest Christian populations that would have numbered total about 300. Think about that. About 300. That was a mega church. In 60 AD, that was a mega church. And what probably was the actual phenomena of the church was house churches of maybe 10 to 30 people, how much you could fit in a house, maybe about half this size. But what we're guessing is that house churches would have cultural distinctions per house church. So one might be Greek speaking, one might be Aramaic speaking, one might say we're vegans. One might say we're beer only. No, I'm just kidding. They wouldn't do that. But you would allow there to be a place that was safe and unified within a particular subculture. And I think there's an advantage to that, and I don't think we do a good job of that. But my guess is they also met as a whole because they had to have heard Paul's letter. He's saying greet so-and-so. So there's a general knowledge that these other people exist, but then there has to be some unity for them to actually greet one another. And Paul says in Romans 14 and 15, some of you think and act in this way, and some of you think and act in this way. And Paul actually sides with one of them. But he says it's unfair and inappropriate to judge each other based on preferences, based on culture, based on, how you best interact with people. And what I think we don't do well in the modern church is we tend to do one or the other. We don't tend to allow both. And so I think the hope is that we can create space for multiculturalism. And if I'm using the word culture broad enough, to be able to capture, let's say, neurodiversity, to be able to capture, I love it when stores, have you heard of this, like IKEA, where they'll have a certain day and time where they'll turn down the lights and not play music for people who struggle with those kinds of things. So they're not saying we're going to change everything all the time, but they're saying we get that this is challenging. Or even during the pandemic, when some grocery stores say, if you're immune compromised, you can come in during these hours where it's just for people that are immune compromised, et cetera, et cetera. Why don't you, this is an opportunity for churches to say, we want it to be a place for everybody. And in order to do that, we need feedback. So that takes a different vision of church, where we say, we're going to have to do it slower. We're going to have to plan better. We're going to have to inconvenience people by, this isn't exactly the problem you have, but my daughter had cancer when she was young. And, she was on steroids, so she was just like a little crazy monster. And she would just run wild at church. And some churches couldn't handle that. We couldn't put her in the children's group because of the possibility of infection. Because she had leukemia, and it was really hard for her. But so she would just literally just run around the back screaming. And only some churches could handle that. And we found this little Anglican church in Paoli, Pennsylvania. And people come up to us afterwards and say, don't worry at all about her. And it just made us feel, we knew it was annoying. We know, by the way, guys. We are those people. But it was just so nice to have a place. And we didn't always experience that. We went to other places where they'd say, can you move into that room, or why don't you sit in the lobby? A lot of people would do that. You guys sit in the lobby. We're like, we could, but we're going to do that for 2 years. We don't want to do that we could do that today, but we don't do that for 2 years. So I think churches need training. I feel like in the day and age we live in, pastors are getting less and less training, and they're not always getting the right kind of training. It's great that they're trained in the Bible. It's great that they're trained in church history. But nowadays we're thinking about training them in things like healthcare and things like what you're talking about, how to better understand who our people are. And how that might inconvenience us. But that we need to have a family meeting and say, what if it was someone in your family that had some of these challenges? Are you not going to invite them to Thanksgiving? Are you not going to invite them to Christmas? So how are we going to live like this? How are we going to support one another? So the hope I give you is the Christians made it a cornerstone value of diversity and unity. And the diversity part is good, but if we don't have the unity part, we're never going to be the church. Then we're going to say, figure it out on your own, we'll pray for you. And I feel like that's kind of what people do nowadays, is just figure it out on your own, we'll pray for you. I do have hope that the attractional church movement is past its prime. The Saddleback days, the Willow Creek days of saying, let's just build them big and let's try to get that one demographic in the door. The white, upper middle class golfer. That was actually what it's a whole thing. That's exactly what Saddleback did. We want the white, upper middle class golfer. We can get 20,000 of those, then we have a church. I think we've proven that doesn't give us the church. That that might raise some great money. Doesn't give us the church. So my hope is there's a movement out of Seattle called the New Parish Movement. It's actually not new. But and it's this idea of instead of regional churches where people drive an hour to go to church, churches should be local and focused on the community. This is how it is in most other countries, except the United States. But I think we're now kind of getting back to that. And the benefit of that is native diversity. You're just going to have diverse people because you're just going to the church down the street. I lived in England for 3 years. And most Brits, if you're Methodist, you go to the Methodist church closest to your house. If you're Anglican, you go to the Anglican church close to your house. We drove 10 minutes to church and people thought we were crazy. It was like, wait, you drive all the way across town to go to church, to choose what church you go to? I like choice, but I like the idea of a new parish model where I talk about this TV show that my wife and I used to watch called Doc Martin. Anyone seen Doc Martin? I watch a lot of TV, folks. I watch a lot of TV. So Doc Martin is about this British surgeon who's from the big city, and he develops this problem. You'll have to watch it. And he has to move away and live in this teeny tiny town. And he's the most curmudgeon-y, grumpy person you've ever seen. But in the British healthcare system, it's not salary-based in terms of, like, can you pay? It's like, for someone in his situation, you're assigned to a group of people, and you're basically paid by the government. And you have to take care of those people whether they can pay for it or not, because it's socialized healthcare, right? So it's funny, like someone falls out of a tree and breaks their arm. He's grumpy about it. He's annoyed, but he has to take care of them because they fall under his jurisdiction. And I think it should be that way with pastors. It's like, I don't like you, but I have to take care of you because you're in my region. Like, there's kind of something about that is what the church was like as a family. Like, we don't always like our family, but when they fall out of a tree and break their arm, we got to take care of them. And so in situations where people have these needs, if they're in my orbit, I have to make sure that they're taken care of. I do think that's in the New Testament, but it's my job, pastor's job, to figure out how to make sure that works for people.
So you're talking about Rome and the structure and everything that's going on and just how hard it was to break into the system. How did Jesus, his apostles, and the Christians do it where basically became a Christian city, Christian community, and Christianity throughout the world?
Great question. How did they do it? The book of Acts is really, really telling for us. And the book of Acts represents something I find really fascinating, a mixture of what sociologists call accommodation and resistance. So if you want to start a completely culture-changing movement, it can't be all resistance, right? Otherwise, you're just a conspiracy theorist on the side of the road with a sign. So you can't just say, I'm going to change the whole economic system or healthcare system overnight. You can't do that. But if it's all accommodation, where you just say we're going to do it the way everybody's done it, that doesn't change anything. So what we see with the apostles is, the beautiful thing is, they go out there and they share their message. Think about Paul and the Mars Hill Council, the Areopagus. He's out there and he's talking about the message. He's a very intellectually rigorous person sharing the message. And what do we see as a reaction? Some people are confused. They think it's weird. Some people are put off. They think it's dangerous. And some people are interested. They think it's attractive. So one thing we learn from the Christians is they're not afraid to be out in public. They're not afraid to be public intellectuals. They're not afraid to put their ideas out there. They're not being secretive, and they're not just, hey, follow me down this alley and we'll talk about Jesus. They're willing to be out there in public. A second thing, though, is they always say in the book of Acts, test us to see if we're good. So the book of Acts narrates trial after trial, Festus, and imperial trials and things like that. The thing they keep doing over and over again is saying, who can assail us? Who can say that we sinned? Who can say that we committed a crime? And they invite people to test their lives. So number one, you have to be people of integrity. You can't possibly be out there pitching Jesus to people unless you're known as good people, and you can say, follow us around. Check us out. Check our papers. Check our bank accounts. It all checks out. And then also that we can prove to you, not just in words, but in deed, that we care for the community. We care for society. So I think there's a balancing act that you have to do of you can give more resistance the more you've shown goodwill. You know, when I go to like a Blazers game, there's someone out there yelling at people. Have you seen those people where they have a microphone, they're yelling at people, damnation and all that? They haven't earned that yet. Now, okay, should you never do that? I don't know. Good luck if that's your calling. But my wife, she's a natural evangelist. She loves sharing Jesus with people, but she's also the PTA president. She's one of the most volunteer. She works at the blood drive, volunteers the blood drive. She's the first person to help with cleanup in the park across our street. So she's earned a voice to be able to say, to be able to talk about Jesus with people openly and honestly. I'm a very shy person, believe it or not. So I'm usually cooking when she brings a neighbor over. So I'll be like chopping carrots, and she'll bring a friend in, and someone she just met, neighbor, and she'll be like, what do you think about Jesus? She'll just start like, what do you think about Jesus? Like, I don't know. I had a bad childhood, in my church, and she'll be like, yeah, those Christians can be weird, but there are some great things about Jesus. And she'll just go on and on. But it's like she has this charm, and they know her. So she's actually trying to change the reputation of Christians by being openly Christian, but also being someone that they know as a person that cares for other people. And so Jesus is a little unique because he's like doing miracles, and he's a prophet, and all, Jesus, he's God, so he's a little bit unique. But the apostles, one of my favorite moments in the book of Acts is where, Peter's going to the temple, very beginning of the book of Acts, and he comes across a beggar, and if you go to India, I've been to India many times, there are a lot of beggars near the temples because people are in kind of a spiritual mood, they're going to give money, and there's beggars everywhere. So I'm imagining there's beggars everywhere, and you just ignore them, because if you don't ignore them, you'll get mobbed by them. So this happens in India if you stop at a stoplight in your car, and these beggars come, and if you give them money, they will swarm your car. You won't be able to move. And my wife will be with me, and she's white. And if they see a white person, they go double on the car. So she has to actually put a hood over her head when we stop at a stoplight. But Peter doesn't flinch, and he says, silver and gold I don't have to you, but what I have I give to you. He says, get up and be healed. We don't have healing powers. If you do, use it. But if you don't, I love what he says. Silver and gold I don't have, but what I have I give to you. Now, what I would say is, I don't have silver or gold, sorry. But Peter says, I don't have, but what I have I will give you. We don't finish that statement. At least I don't. But what if we did? What if we actually earned a voice in society? Then there can be room for pushback. There could be room for resistance, saying, we got to talk about this issue here. We got to talk about this thing, or I don't agree with this, or the Bible says this. But often when I hear the Bible talked about in the news, I cringe, because we've lost that reputation for being good people, for being people that care about people. I think we can get there again. I think we can do it. We can't just let Tim Tebow do it, okay? We have to actually, regular folk have to, we can't have all just those athletes talk about Jesus. We need to talk about it. We need to find a place where we can do it too. I think we can. I think it'll be meaningful to people. I think you see that, for example, like a Brian Stevenson, Just Mercy, where he's doing all this advocacy for the public, and he's able to earn a voice for Jesus. We see people like that. Those can be leading lights for us.
As a church, we're going through the book Radical by David Platt. I don't know if you're familiar with that and his ideas and things like that, but he comes across pretty strong. And if we're not living out Jesus' words, like when he says to the rich young ruler, go sell all you have, give it to the poor, and he walked away because he wouldn't. Yeah. How do you resonate or not with some of those kind of, it seems radical. Similar.
It's radical.
But I'm trying to hear what you're saying, and that's a lot of stuff we're trying to digest, which is like, so we're not really Christian if we're not, we have a lot of good discussion. coming up about that.
I mean, Jesus does say to his disciples, you know, you're going to have to give things up. You're going to, but you'll get it back. You'll get back later is kind of what he says. I think that impulse is at the heart of Christianity. At the same time, I heard this guy named Richard Hayes talk about this, and he said, beginning of the book of Acts, you have Christians say, let's throw all our money in together. Nobody has property. We all live in a hippie commune, and you know we eat organic. But then Richard Hayes says, by the time you get to Paul's letters, he needs rich people to host churches. And he says, set aside money every week so that you Gentile churches can give to the poor Judean churches that are experiencing a famine. So Paul actually just assumes people have individual wealth. I remember when this is not going to answer your question, but I'll give it a go. I remember asking my pastor when I was a very young person, when I had hair, I guess. And I remember saying, like, how do you know when you have too much money? You know, is it like a certain number? Is it like you enter another tax bracket? Like, what's the actual? And I do believe in radical discipleship, but I liked his answer. He says, you get to the point where you ask, do I own my stuff or does my stuff own me? And I think what he was trying to say is it's how we think about money. I remember during the pandemic and just the horrors of all the needs we have and how we couldn't solve them. And I thought to myself, if you get like an Elon Musk to just donate all his money to a cure, it happened like that. I mean, the guy's just got buckets of money. Or Jeff Bezos or whoever. Who's going to give up their money for something and they won't get it back necessarily? But who's going to step up? You know, I even think about that with Portland. Like, Portland is really struggling. And we need like a business to come in and like reinvigorate. Like we need like a Nike or an Intel to come in and give just buckets of money. So I think there's a place for wealthy Christians who are radically generous. So I don't necessarily think everybody needs to go and give I think Jesus was pricking the heart of the rich young ruler and saying, are you willing to give up your money for me? It's kind of like that test of Abraham. But that should never, I hope this doesn't come across the wrong way, they're greedy poor people too. So money isn't always the problem. Now, read the book of James. James is pretty hard on people with money. But I think it comes down to the radical part. I've heard people say this before. It's easy to make a big decision in a moment. I'm going to give away my stuff. I'm going to break all my secular CDs, which is what I did when I was 17. I'm really sad because I didn't know U2 was Christian. Sorry, Bono. Wish I still had that Joshua Tree album. But harder is daily discipleship. And to me, that's where the radicality comes in. I don't mind big gestures. I think there's something really... Those stories are great to tell. Let's put it that way. I love big gesture stories. The harder thing to do is what Paul says when he says, I die daily. 1 Corinthians 15. I die daily. So how do we die daily? I think that's the more radical thing. You can make a grandiose gesture once, and that could be great. And that could be great for other people, so by all means. Martin Luther once said, God doesn't need your good works, but your neighbor does. I love that because sometimes that grandiose gesture feels like, okay, I've done it, God. Now I can like get my like star on the Walk of Fame. But that's not what discipleship is. So I'm not trying to downplay the radical nature of Christianity. I guess I'm trying to say, how can we build that into daily life rather than I'm going to give a bunch of money to this capital campaign or I'm going to, be a missionary for a year. Those things are good, but you come back and then you still have to live your life. And I think the radical comes, moment of vulnerability. I meet with a spiritual director who's kind of like a therapist. And that's kind of what we do. We meet once a month, and he just talks through with me like, are you giving everything to Jesus? Like, and I'll talk through my problems, and I think they're really difficult, complex problems, and he'll be like, what would Jesus say if he was in the room? I'm like, I can't believe I pay you to ask me this question. But it's the best money I spend every month, because he asks me these really direct, plain questions. Like, if Jesus were, like, I'm making a decision, should I sin or not sin? But what would Jesus say? Pay me my money. Don't sin. I got that one right. But that's what we need. And so I guess to maybe answer your question, a part of it is, one of my heroes is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great early middle 20th century German theologian. And he had the idea for a new kind of seminary. So in his day, the 1930s, seminaries were basically schools of philosophy. You just sat in a classroom, took notes, studied the great philosophers and theologians, learned Greek and Hebrew and Latin and all that. You didn't do what we think of as spiritual disciplines. And when Bonhoeffer was asked to lead the confessing church seminary, which was like a breakaway from the German church, the Reich Church, he created basically like a Christian camp. It's called Finkenwalde. And he's this really proper, well-dressed, refined German upper-class man. But he had this vision that Christians should be confessing their sins to one another. He spent some time in the United States, in Harlem, and he brought back black gospel records. He'd play them. They'd never heard music like this. He'd be dancing and singing. And it was that sense of like, he believed that Christians really have to be in the life of each other to hold each other accountable. And so he had this friend, Eberhard Bethke, and he would actually, it was a student, he would confess his sins to the student, and he would say, now it's your turn. That shot, like imagine you're in church and they're like, okay, turn to one another, and you're like, to greet, no, to confess your sins to one another. I'm not saying you should do that. Next Sunday. You're going to need to refill on this then. But the idea that you could go to church and leave and not have a meaningful conversation with anybody would be unfathomable to the early Christians. It'd be unfathomable. I teach a course on the life of the church. We use a fancy word, ecclesiology. And I have my students read this article from the 1980s by a scholar named Howard Marshall. And he made a really interesting argument. He made the argument that Christians didn't come together for a teaching. They didn't even come together for worship. I do think they came together for worship. But he says the main thing that came together was for what he calls mutual upbuilding. Meaning the individual Christians in the church utilize their spiritual gifts to challenge, encourage, and equip one another. Now you're wondering, what do the pastors do? The pastors invisibly curate and cultivate that community. So I like to call the church the beautiful game, like soccer. I'm a big soccer fan. And when you're watching soccer, if the camera's on the coach, it's usually a bad thing. Like they're flipping out, or they're going to get a red card, they're going to get ejected, or something's wrong. You don't want, when you're watching the beautiful game, you don't want to watch the coaches. And it should be like that with the church. No offense to pastors, but it should be like that with the church when the beautiful game is happening, which is the people of God expressing their spiritual gifts of hospitality, word of wisdom, encouragement, community, teaching. The coaches have done their work already through the week, through training, to make sure the game goes well, to make sure the game happens beautifully. And they recede in the background, and they cheer the group on, and they say, did we play well or not? They evaluate, and they said, did the people of God play the game well? They don't say, did I teach well? Did I preach well? How smart did I look? How many people greeted me after? They say, did the people actually do it? Have we trained the people to do this or not? This is what we call equipping the saints. To me, a radical church would be a church that equips the people of God to carry out the ministries of the church, rather than relying on a few people to do everything. This is turning into all my rants about the church. Sorry about that.
Along those lines, I was just going to ask a question real quick, too. I know we have a couple pastors here in the room today.
Sorry about that.
And so my question is, I loved what you were saying about that. And so how would you say are steps to be cultivators and curators of that culture of empowerment of organizations and church bodies, considering I think there's that saying or philosophy that it tends to be 20% of an organization does 80% of the ministry or work of that organization?
I mean, we have to just rethink church. Just like one of the beautiful things of the pandemic, and there weren't that many beautiful things. One of the beautiful things is we had to completely rethink church because you couldn't do it the way you did it before. And I think we failed in the sense that we just tried to do it the same, but put a camera in front of it. And a couple of times I had to preach to a camera with no people around. It stinks. It's the absolute worst because you feed off of whether people are getting it and whether they care and all of that. When you're just looking at a camera, it's just like, it's like a TV show without a laugh track. Is it even worth it? But I would say, I was mentioning to John, and maybe to you as well, there's a church in Portland called Alongsiders Church. It's my friend Greg Russinger. And he's in a really central part of the city on the east side where there was a lot of fear about health concerns, politics, safety, all kinds of stuff. And he knew that when people came to church after they were able to come back to church, they wanted to make sure that showing up made a difference versus I could have done this at home. So what I love is he just said, I'm going to do it completely differently. What if church wasn't about getting people together to hear me talk for 40 minutes? What if church was really for the people to get together to talk to one another? So I've preached there a couple times, and so he explained the system to me. So you come in, there's announcement, news, and singing and all that, and then he gives like a 12 to 15 minute message, which is kind of like a testimony or like a mini sermon based on a scripture passage, the word of God for the people of God. But then they're at tables just like this, except they're round tables, and there's probably 4 or 5 people to a table, and then they have a table host, which is like either a pastor or a lay person, a trained lay person, and they lead discussions. And the discussions aren't like, how super smart are you at theology? The discussions are like the scripture text, what from what the message was resonated with you, what's going on in your life that this makes you reflect on, things that anyone can answer. And people can share or not share, and the table hosts are ready for that. It takes some training. And I tell you what, nobody leaves those tables feeling like it didn't matter they showed up. Because the people there are friendly. And there's families, and there's kids drawing with crayons, and there's older people and younger people. I'm not saying that's the only way you should do church, but isn't this pretty great? This is pretty great, right? I feel like the churches that I've been a part of sometimes, they operate with a lot of control because they operate with a lot of fear. If you don't control it down to the last second, it starts to become unwieldy. And if it starts to become unwieldy, then people won't like it. But then it so easily turns into a show. And the thing with shows, I just listened to a really good podcast on this. The things with shows are your local church can never be good as the best church out there that has better sound, better preachers, better equipment. So your pastor's always going to feel like they're 5 steps behind because they're not Tim Keller, and they're not Beth Moore, and they're not the next great preacher. But what if it wasn't about that at all? It was about someone knowing their people. There's a church I go to. I'm sure your church is wonderful, but there's a church that I sometimes go to in Portland. The pastor stands out front, and he greets as many people by name as he possibly can when they come in. And he's just doing his thing, and he loves the people, but just to have your name spoken by somebody every week outside of your family, especially in an atmosphere where we work from home so much, and we try to have as few meetings as possible because I hate meetings. To have somebody say your name and know that they're happy to see you every single week. We need that now more than we ever needed that. So I think a big part of it is we can't tweak the system. We have to start over and say, what are the fundamentals that we want to be true of church? And then say, scrap how we did it before. I don't, we're not beholden to that. It's great. I miss old hymns, by the way. I love old hymns. But we're not beholden to that. We have to say, what's actually going to get us to the desired outcome of the people of God being equipped? I think we need better teaching on the spiritual gifts, because I think most people show up to church ready to get something. I remember there's a period of church in college that I didn't go to church. I'm sorry, it's a confession time. I've drank like 80% of it, so it's confession time. There's a period of church of college I didn't go to church, and I had a discipleship mentor through the Navigators, and he said, "How's church going?" I was like, "I'm sorry, Greg, I haven't been going the last 5-6 months." He said, "Why not?" I said, "Tell me if you've heard this before. I just don't get anything out of it." You guys ever felt that way? I don't get anything out of it. You know what he said to me? He said, "Nijay, that's because you're a consumer and you're not a giver." Oh man, that pierced me to the soul. He just said it just like that. And he just said it bluntly and directly to my face. And I've remembered that for a very, very long time, more than 20 years. I think we need to shift the mentality. There's a church, I think, in the South. I can't remember which church it is. But like when you show up to church for the first time, it's a huge church. They tell you, I've heard this, they tell you first week is free, second week and on you have to volunteer. They just tell you, first week, enjoy. Have a nice seat, enjoy. Second week, you volunteer. Pick one of the ministries. Now, I know what you're going to say. Some people are not going to be into that. And I'd say, then some people aren't going to be into church. I think there's something to say about this is just who we are. We pitch in. We help out. We do what needs to be done. And we say, what are you good at? There was a church a really small church I went to in England. There's only like 60 people in the church. Bless you. And there was a woman, an older woman, and she led the Sunday school for the little kids. And she was great with the kids. She taught Bible stories. Everyone loved her. And our kids were in that ministry. And one day the husband came up and he said, I want to be involved in this group, but I'm not good with kids. So the pastor said, "What are you good at?" He's like, "Well, I'm good at making furniture." He said, "Will you come in and show them how to make a piece of furniture?" And it was a win-win. Like he came in, he showed them how to make a stool, and the kids were just amazed and wowed. And I just thought, like, what if the church said everybody has something they can give, even if it's not like teaching a Sunday school? So I'm going to give you one last thing. I know we have to wrap up. How many of you know that Portland has an event called the Fix-It Fair? How many of you heard of this, the Fix-It Fair? Okay, so it takes place on the east side. I don't know if they still do it, but it's pretty cool. So you show up. It's a city. It's put on by the city and the Energy Trust of Oregon and PGE. Down with PGE because they raised our prices, though. Okay. So they put on this event where you can bring anything, one item from your house to fix, like a toaster or a vacuum or a piece of clothing that has a hole in it. And there are these volunteer lines. So these are city people. It's not Christian ministry. And there's like an appliance line, electronics line, a clothing line, a bicycle line. You get one thing. You go on this line, you get it fixed. These are people who are matching needs to people's expertise. And the energy companies there showing you how to save energy. The water companies there showing you how to save water. They have a cheap meal. And I just thought, like, what if the church created a Fix-It Fair? And we said, like, okay, who's good with cars? Who's good with computers that can fix your Wi-Fi or can make your computer faster? Like, who's good at, who can teach a cooking lesson? Help us better understand how to save energy when we're cooking, whatever it is. Like, what if we did that? Because we're saying everybody has something to give. Everyone has something to contribute. Rather than just the most important people who can preach a sermon or who can, give $1 million to pay for a new building. But we say everybody's good at something. So what can you be good at, and what can you come and like? I would love like we had this we had like a fuse go out in our house, and my brother-in-law who lives in Indiana is like super handyman, and so we had this fuse go out, this outlet go out, and I Googled it, and I couldn't fix it, and then I call him, and I was like, Joe, what do I do? And because you get an electrician that's going to charge you $100 just to show up. I'm like, I don't want to pay $100 of it easy. So he said, did you try to click the button? I said, yes, Joe. I tried to I'm not stupid. He said, well, did you go to the fuse box? I said, yes, Joe, I went to the fuse box. He said, did you flip the switch? I was like, yeah, I flipped the switch, and it flipped back. I'm thinking, like, Joe, I'm not stupid. He said, you have to flip it till it clicks. I was like, oh, okay. I did that. It worked. He saved me $100 over the phone. Yeah. What if the church had these things where we say, I'm going to teach you how to fix your toilet in church, after church, so you don't have to pay somebody else to help you figure out how to fix your toilet. Or I'm going to help you figure out how to winterize your house. I'm going to teach you how to winterize your house so you don't have to go into this problem. And we just said, we just have these every week. Someone gives like a 30-minute how-to. Everybody can contribute. Isn't this a great idea? I'm full of ideas. If I get a second sandwich, I would have more ideas.
Hi there. I just a few comments after you were talking earlier. So many people just the church or Christians and so forth, but I didn't read the whole article because I didn't have access to it, but I see like Oswego is where I live. They're looking for churches to sponsor. We have affordable housing that's being built on Boone's Ferry. So they're looking for Christian churches to pitch in to help these people. And I thought, that's the group that, what other groups do you go to? Yeah. You go to the church. And then I was just thinking about, the great choirs you were talking about, where do you go? You go to the churches. There's so many people who are non-Christians or borderline or just sour feelings about it, but they want to be a part of a good church, a choir. And so that's where they go to. And then I was thinking about, the pastors can't take care of everything. They might be able to pair somebody together and so forth. And I'm thinking about, people who are widows or divorcees or whatever, and those people get together and then they cultivate amongst themselves and form a group and pray for each other and so forth. And that's where I see the pastors just overseeing, but they can't be in everything. And I belong to a great widow group. And so we get together and support one another. It's like the divorcees or whatever group, you're in with kids with special eds and so forth. Sometimes you have to move to a bigger church, a huge church, to reach that population. So that was just my comment.
Thanks for the comments. There's there are a lot of churches doing divorce recovery groups. There are churches that are doing AA and all those kinds of things with sexuality and addictions. And the city tries to do those things, but Portland's maxed. They just can't operate a lot of these things. So for churches to say, we care about people, we want to do that, and you have quote unquote lay people, I think when pastors do too much, it robs lay people. I'm not putting that on the pastors in the sense they want to do that. No pastor wants to overwork, unless they get paid a lot, like John. But I think you free yourself up. You free yourself up as a leader by equipping people and figuring out what their passions are. But again, it's going to take us to bust the paradigm. We're going to have to, and I was hoping that happened during the pandemic, where we said we're just going to start over and build it from the ground up of what does it look like to actually be a community for Jesus and for the world, or a community in Jesus for the world. I feel like you're doing stuff like that here. This isn't the whole church, but this is a piece of it here that we don't have. In fact, my students love seminary because we get to think deeply. We get to converse in a safe environment where we can express our doubts and concerns. And then we have 3 hours to talk. And they have an hour of small groups and all of that. Why can't church be like that, where we actually talk about stuff? I was part of a ministry out of Newburgh called Deep Water. It's basically men dealing with trauma in their life, and it can be all kinds of trauma. And it was a lot of people, we go to this weekend retreat, and it's a lot of people who said, I just can't actually bring up these difficult things with people at church. Isn't that heartbreaking that if someone says, Nijay, how are you? I can't say, I'm a wreck. Someone needs to help me right now. I can't say that because of decorum, because of respectability. So I have to go to an outside ministry, privately somewhere else, to say, I'm a wreck, and I just need to lay on that couch and cry for a couple of hours, which I did actually during the weekend. Why can't churches be like that? And we say, oh, but people don't open up. We set the tone and culture, we leaders. We actually say what people do or don't do based on the way we act and what ministries we provide and the atmosphere that we create. Now, I'm not saying it has to be a free-for-all. I'm not saying we show up with no plan. But I'm saying we start with what we think is the most important, and then we build the structure around that. I bet it'd look very different if we did it that way. It'd look very different.
Man, well, that was so good. Thank you, Nijay. Can you guys give him a hand? It's empty. We need another beer. And also, want to give a shout out to Kai over here. He's been able to help us out. This is his last bar talk with us. He's heading out to Arizona, so thank you so much, Kai. Tip him really well tonight. And we have I would say about 15 minutes, and then we got to get all booted on out of here. But feel free to continue the conversation out of these doors. We could even open up our church if you need a space that's warm to have these conversations. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. Got something to say?
Yeah, what's next? What's next month?
Oh no, I'm blanking. John?
Becky Josberger. She's a Hebrew professor from Multnomah. She's going to be talking about the Torah. Really excited.
Becky Josberger from Multnomah University is going to be talking about Torah.
Yes.
What he said.
I mean, she was my Hebrew professor, and she is just brilliant. She's incredibly compassionate. And I think you would learn a lot from her, as I did. She helped me translate a lot of the Old Testament, and forever indebted to her.
All right, well, hey, thank you so much for being here tonight. Again, we meet the last Tuesday of every month. We hope to see you again next month. And yeah, if you ever want to experience a church that's weird, compelling, and dangerous, we're 2 doors down, and there's plenty of that as well. Thanks.